I think it is space essentially is only a space, right? So the vision, the leadership carries, and how it triggers into how to actually interact and use the space, I think is actually crucial.
If you make good use of cultural heritage, you can create new identity for your institution, and you can benefit your students and faculty as well, and also the wider community.
I think a school is a canvas, and then the culture is built by the people who occupy that canvas. Our job is to create the spaces, create the canvas, create the rooms for educators to teach, children to learn, engage, etc. That's our role.
Respecting each other as human beings forms an important part of a child's education. And as such, it was important that not only the faculty and the students had environments that were exciting and interesting to work in, but also as the contract part was.
Welcome to the Education Vanguard. I'm Justin Hardman. In this episode, we're stepping inside a conversation about how physical space shapes the way we learn. Recorded at the 21st Century Learning Conference, this panel was hosted by Steelcase and MVKM Group. The panel brings together architects, designers, and educators working across Hong Kong and beyond. They explore how schools and libraries are being reinvented, from converted retail podiums to heritage buildings, and why great design starts with one simple act: listening. So, let's listen in to this conversation.
This afternoon, we have architects, designers, and educators coming together to share insights, strategies, and their experiences on how to make these spaces happen. My name is MJ Jimenez, representing MBKM Group, the authorized dealer for Steelcase Learning in Hong Kong. And to better introduce you or to orient you about this session, please allow me to introduce the speakers to you, and please say a few lines about yourself and what you do. So first is Mr. Owen Tam from the HKMU Library.
Thank you, MJ. Hi, everyone. I'm Owen from the Hong Kong Metropolitan University Library. And our sort of service to our students nowadays is like we're going to a GLAM hub mode. It's integrating library, gallery, museums, and archives. So it's an all-round service for our campus.
Next panelist is Mr. Chak.
Hi everyone, I am Chak. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Envision. We're designers and architects. We've been working on international schools and also workplace campus projects in APAC.
Next speaker is Mr. Richard Dorkin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Richard from Ryder, basically. So I'm an architect, trained in the UK, but been in Hong Kong for 14 years now. So interested to compare UK approach and Hong Kong approach, which more around international schools. I think my first school was Darlington Education Village back in the early 90s, which was a very interesting project. We'll get to that later.
Next speaker might be familiar to some of you who's been in the education circle for some time now. Mr. John Martinson.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, John Martinson. I was trained as an architect, and I'm now project managing some work with the Cognitic Group. So I'll give you some more details as we go.
Now down to the nitty-gritty of the panel discussion. So there has been a trend where a lot of non-traditional spaces have been converted to education spaces and schools. Now the question is, beyond immediate design, what was the most critical strategic challenge that you had to solve to make the educational vision work? And please share the educational vision you started with. Anyone would like to start on that question?
I can start. I think, as with any project, I think the first thing is listening. We have to listen to the educators, understand the pedagogy, how they work. Because before we do that, before we put a pen to paper, we've got to understand what it is they're trying to do. And obviously every school is different. Yes, there's international curriculum, there's international baccalaureate, but each school premises is different. So it's really listening is the first thing, I would say.
Anyone else would like to chime in?
Yes, listening to the educators and also to the students as well is an important part of the program. We've just recently completed a project with Stanford American School, which has been the refurbishment of 3 floors of a retail podium. And I think one of the premises around this discussion was around finding space in Hong Kong, which is very difficult to find for schools, for new schools. And so consequently, we had to refurbish commercial or retail spaces. And clearly those spaces were never designed to be education spaces. So we're confronting a lot of challenges, physical challenges, in the use of those spaces, which can create quite innovative solutions. As an example, the space that we took over is about 80 meters deep and about 33 meters wide. And that's not traditionally a way that a school would be designed. So you've got to find ways of creating, if you were normally working to efficiency ratios of 70% or so in terms of the amount of circulation space that you've got, you might find with taking over commercial spaces that you're dealing with much greater areas of circulation just because you've got to create some sort of sense of space in there. And there's all sorts of issues like that, the implications of that. The notion of a corridor changes to becoming an education space if you start looking at it in a different way. So interesting challenges that the space provider in Hong Kong was presenting to us.
It's interesting. I understand John's challenge with the site because we've recently completed a school for adults and international and actually moved from that particular site to the new campus, which is the old Rosary Hill campus, which is a 60-year-old building. So we're facing very different challenges in terms of dealing with a very old building, having to deal with the BD submissions, approval process, there's architectural, interior, landscape, and also traffic that we need to all coordinate under our banner. So it was a whole different challenge. But I guess one of the reasons the client decided to move on to the island side was to have a little more outdoor area, which they managed to achieve. Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, converting an old school to national school was quite interesting.
Yeah, I echo the other panelists saying that listening is very important and interaction between the service provider and your stakeholders is really important. When our library was built, we are a relatively young library. Our university is like 35 years old. But when our library was built in the 1990s, at that time it served our purpose well, preserving collection, giving access. But the education sectors is really changing very fast. So nowadays people want things like collaborative learning. You need to make a space for the students to try the prototypes. For us, our students come to us and say that I need a DIY studio to record my presentation on my projects. How do you do that? How do you convert your old library building to suit their needs? So we need to sit down to talk to them. We at our library, we have a liaison system. So all the librarians need to serve the different schools. So we go to talk to the schools to see what are your needs for teaching. And then we have focus group with the students. And after that, we come back and re-evaluate their needs and how we can better serve them. So yeah, listening and interaction is very important.
Okay. Yeah, so building on that question, we were talking about expansions, moving to another location, creating new spaces. Every time we expand to a new space or move to a new location, one of the most critical things that we want to bring over usually is the culture. So culture, when I say culture, it's both exists as an internal attitude in its shared beliefs, values, norms, and mindsets, but also as a physical, tangible space. Both of which are very critical to shaping behavior and supporting student agency. How need you navigate preserving heritage, for example, for Dalton, for Stanford, or for your other projects, but also somehow establishing a new identity for that expansion?
At Stanford, the school culture is a really interesting thing. It's, as with any institution, any organization, the culture will manifest itself in the physical environment, whether it's wanted to or not, and whether it's good or bad. For example, Stanford's values are academic excellence, creativity, the innovation, compassion, integrity. And those are fine words, but if they're not being manifest in the behavior of the faculty and management, then it won't be, it doesn't matter what the physical environment is that you create. So it's important that when we're talking about things like culture, that we're looking at that an entire holistic view of it. Having said that, the culture at Stanford is very much based around, the school was set up as a transition school between school and university. And so there was a focus on creating as a diverse arrangement of educational spaces as possible, from autonomous, individual, self-motivated work to traditional didactic type teaching. And that means that areas like, as I was saying before, things like corridors, the corridors there are 3 or 4 meters wide with furniture in them, and they get used extensively as spaces, as breakout spaces for teachers with students or students just getting together. And they've become really an important part of the daily life of the way the students choose to take ownership of the school. They're not just a neat conveyance of students between a classroom and a dining room, for example. And so that was one area of that also actually, interestingly, gave us an opportunity when the school was managing a regional robotics championship, and the Stanford American School just yesterday was awarded the top STEAM school in Great Bay Area. Very proudly, it's a big part of the offering that Stanford American School has, and so is robotics, and they're a leading robotics school. When we had the championships, rather than putting all of the 12 to 15 schools into classrooms so that they could work on their robots, we put them into these very wide corridor spaces. And it was a cluster. So going in there, it was like a scene from Blade Runner, where all of these kids with these amazing machines. I was judging, the whole thing is set up around the competition. They have to write an engineering report. Some of these reports are really detailed, and an interview, and I was judging the interview stage. And these kids were amazing, 10, 11-year-old kids who had written a 200-page engineering document. It was just mind-blowing. But that's the sort of innovation, that's the sort of cultural element that the school needs to foster and also to accommodate.
For Dorkin, we had a few balls to juggle there because firstly, it's one of the few Chinese and international school which is not just teaching Chinese language, but also the culture as well. So it's one of the newer concept that they started in Hong Kong 15 years ago. We had to incorporate quite a bit of that into the design of the space, also allowing different learning, for example, different libraries for English books, Chinese books, different learning settings. Also, there's the component where Rosary Hill School as a heritage school it's close to the heart of a lot of people in Hong Kong, so it has a strong cultural element. And the time that the announcement of the school was going to be transited was relatively short. So we're dealing also with PR issues as well. And so part of the design brief was to how do we preserve the heritage of the school. And part of the solution was actually building a museum honoring the school. There's also a church, a chapel that operates there as well, which has been operating for the last 50 years. So we have to preserve that as well because essentially they are also the landlord. And we want to be nice to them, of course. And finally, there's the primary school. There are mini Dorkin, which we work with Richard on as well. So there are a lot of different faculties which we had to separate entrances in a 250,000 square feet space, which was quite a challenge, but we got there at the end. Yeah.
So cultural heritage and new identity. These two terms actually played well in our university. We were really lucky that last year we got a very generous donation of the Eileen Chan. She's recognized as one of the most influential Chinese writers in the 20th century. So we got a generous donation of her works, her manuscripts, her letters with the famous writers in the literary circle to us. So then what do we do with this, important cultural heritage? So of course we build an archive space to preserve that, but that's not enough. We need to better use these resources to benefit, our students and the wider community, and to promote that. So what we did is we created a museum of modern Chinese literature inside the library. So we move the shelves around, we some of the outdated, collections, move things around, create this new space. And that really give us a new identity, to the community. I'll just give you an example. Within the first 3 months of the opening, we attracted more than 2,300 visitors from local and overseas. Yeah. So really, if you make good use of cultural heritage, you can create new identity for your institution, and you can benefit your students and faculty as well, and also the wider community.
Richard, your take on preserving heritage?
Oh gosh, it's an interesting one. There's two projects I was looking back on this morning actually before coming in this afternoon was we did Nobel School in Stevenage in the UK, which alumni was Lewis Hamilton, one of the students there. So the whole school was focused on STEM back in those days, not STEAM as it is today. And he, or should I say at the time, his racing team were going to donate a F1 car to the school. So the whole design was around engineering, but also the building itself was a post-Second World War de Havilland developed solution for fast build schools basically after all the destruction in the UK. So that was quite interesting as a project. So we managed to preserve the existing buildings and build a large sort of 4-story extension at the back of the site to accommodate their needs. But again, it's just interesting to the 2 or the 3 speakers here. Every school is different, like every business. So there's a personality that comes through in terms of leadership, but also the students themselves and how they move on, as you do from universities as well. The second one is Bolingbroke Academy in Wandsworth, which was for ARC, achieving results for kids who were a free school organisation in the UK that came out to the Department for Education thinking back in the sort of the 2000s, 2010s, 2000 to 2010. And they took the old Bolingbroke Hospital, which is next door to Wandsworth Barbary, was studying grade 2 listed building. And we had to figure out a school in that building. And that was really interesting because it was really with a very sensitive building and a very sensitive conservation department within the local authority. But the school had a great building there. And what I was looking at this morning was purely how are the schools doing? And I could see for the schools are producing very good results. And that's what it's about for us from a design point of view. I think a school is a canvas, and then the culture is built by the people who occupy that canvas. Our job is to create the spaces, create the canvas, create the rooms for educators to teach, children to learn, engage, etc. That's our role.
One of the aspects of at Stanford, for example, but it's the best example I've got at the moment. This is the most current, but respecting each other as human beings forms an important part of a child's education. And as such, it was important that not only the faculty and the students had environments that were exciting and interesting to work in, but also as the contract staff. So we created rooms that are actually quite prominent in the school, which for the contract staff to use too, where they've got their own showers and dining area and so on. And their behaviour also, it changes and they become much more part of the overall community of the school.
Just echoing what John and Richard was saying, I think it is space essentially is only a space, right? So the vision, the leadership that the leadership carries and how it triggers into how to actually interact and use the space, I think is actually crucial. So I think change management is actually a big part of it, not just with the teachers, but also with the students aligning that vision. So I think that's a big part of the software.
I totally agree with you. Just the space and furniture is not enough. It's the whole ecosystem. Your program, your staff, your students, everything. And also with IT. Yeah.
That's perfect. Anyway, I'm just being mindful of the time. We have 5 minutes left. So let's just roll it into one question and please end with your closing message or closing remark on your thoughts on space design. The theme is from passive to proactive design. So historically, for example, for libraries, it was all about preservation of knowledge, where everything was called shelvings, very traditional. For classrooms, it was rows of tables and chairs, very theatrical, just one-way communication. How do you promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? And at the same time, designing a space that will be very intuitive, that allows the children to learn differently. Any thoughts, any final thoughts on this idea? If you can, please be space specific. For example, Owen, your thoughts on the library, your thoughts on classroom specific ideas, your thoughts on corridors. and your general idea on design for learning spaces.
Okay, so I think most importantly is in the old days, sometimes you anticipate your users' needs and you build up on that. But sometimes it's only the administrator or the librarian's own thinking. So go back to the first question we talked about. Listen is very important and interaction. So what we did was, apart from the focus group, from the liaison program, we do surveys, we talk to the industry people like your company, we talk to our peers and see what's happening outside. And then we built what's needed by our users, by our stakeholders. So interaction is very important, and inclusiveness you mentioned. So of course, being a responsible university, apart from the ordinary people, we also take care of the student with special education needs, SEN students. So for those kind of needs, we also need to pay attention to.
Gentlemen, anyone wants to do up next?
The nature of libraries, for example, is changing dramatically in schools. What used to be a repository for getting books is now a dynamic place for creation of knowledge. And as such, the whole nature of the library in schools is changing to flexibility. And so we've put in, for example, all of the bookshelves are on wheels. And the library takes up a very prominent, one of the best locations in the school as a multifunction area. However, those activities that are expected need to be also trained and taught as well. Because what we're finding is it's still being used as a very pleasant place to work and study, but it's not. We're not getting the dynamic creation of project teams and so on that we thought we would. But on that note, we also, because it's a transitional school, created environments like tutorial rooms inside the library as well. And those are very well used. And students, it's amazing how students will go from being quite immature to being quite mature if the environment is created for them to act in a mature way. And that's what we've found in school.
Richard, Eric, anyone want to go next?
Oh, I've got some things I will say. I think, just speaking of a library, we did a library for ESF at Charlton College. And again, as John just said, it's a repository of knowledge, but it's also a teaching space now. Very much people using it in that way. I think the closing remark for me is what we're seeing in UK education. I'm sure we're seeing it here is up to neurodiversity, inclusion being a big issue, SEND, in terms of special education needs and disability, but also the whole digital aspect of learners now being much more independent and learning on their own or needing support in maybe more social skills, mindful thinking, critical thinking, those sort of things. So even for all the educators here, their job is getting very hard, very challenging in terms of how we engage with every single individual. But for an individual student today, I think it's super exciting because you can now tailor their learning to suit their stage as well as their age, if that makes sense. So it's interesting times, I would say, for education.
And Eric, to close?
No, I do agree. I think students these days, especially with the internet, and they're very purposeful. Like when they search for information, it is very purposeful. So how do you create a space for them to interact? The problem isn't finding the information. It's really for them to interact and encouraging that interaction. I think that's crucial, engaging them into the space and create a purpose for them to come and operate there. We had an early discussion before the panel that it's very difficult to attract people back into the space, whether it's a teaching facility, whether it's office as well. So it's crucial to give them a purpose to come back to the space, whether it's collaboration, focus work, or whatnot.
Unfortunately, we are short on time. It's very rare to get industry thought leaders specializing in the education space on one stage. We can probably continue the question and answer outside if the gentlemen are free. But in closing, I think my greatest takeaway is that there is no one cookie cutter template in resolving the issue for an active learning space. Providing children with a space that will intuitively allow them to learn differently takes discussion, takes time, takes process, takes the team to resolve. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.